The sky above Bloodhaven split like fabric caught on glass. No warning, no buildup. One moment the clouds hung heavy with smoke from burning districts, the next a jagged line of white light carved through the atmosphere and hung there pulsing. Dick Grayson didn't stop moving when it appeared. He had 6 civilians trapped in a collapsed parking structure, and about 30 seconds before the supports gave out completely. "Move," he said into his comm. The word came out calm despite the sweat running down his neck. "Structural failure imminent. Get those people clear, people." Around him, Bloodhaven was coming apart in slow motion. Justice League gone. Vanished without explanation, without bodies, without anything the world could point to and say, that's what happened. The news called it the vanishing. The streets called it the end. Dick called it a problem he didn't have time to solve while buildings were still falling. The white crack in the sky widened. Something small tumbled out of it. Dick caught the motion in his peripheral vision as he hauled a middle-aged bug over a broken concrete slab. The falling object wasn't debris. It moved wrong for that. Too controlled. Too deliberate in the way it oriented itself during descent. It landed in the middle of the street 3 blocks east. No impact crater. No shockwave. Just a soft touchdown like someone stepping off a curb. Dick got the civilian to the safe zone, signaled the next responder to take over, and moved toward the landing site. His Eskrima sticks were already in his hands. The weight felt good. Familiar. He'd been fighting fires and pulling people from rubble for 18 hours straight. But this was different. This required a different kind of attention. The thing that fell from the sky was a child. At least it looked like one. Small body, maybe 3 feet tall. Round head too large for the frame. Blue skin. Purple markings on the cheeks. Dressed in robes that seemed formal despite their bright pink color. The kid stood in the center of the street, looking around with wide eyes that took in the chaos without fear or comprehension. Dick slowed his approach. His tactical mind ran through possibilities. Meta-human, alien, magical construct. Didn't matter right now. What mattered was the kid was standing in an active disaster zone. "Hey," Dick called out, keeping his voice gentle. "You okay? We need to get you somewhere safe." The child turned to look at him, blinked once. Didn't answer. Before Dick could try again, the air pressure changed. That particular tightening that meant incoming hostiles. He'd felt it enough times to trust the instinct. They came from the north. 24 soldiers in black armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Pariah's forces. Dick had been fighting them for 3 days now, ever since the League disappeared and the world started tearing at the seams. They moved in formation, weapons raised, scanning for targets. Their scanners locked onto the child. Dick stepped between them and the kid. His mind was already working through the math. 24 armed combatants. Him. Civilian in the crossfire. The numbers weren't good, but he'd worked with worse. "Stand down," he said. It wasn't a request. "Civilian area. You want to fight, take it somewhere else." The lead soldier ignored him. Raised a hand. The gesture was clear, acquire the target. They moved fast. Professional. Dick met them halfway, Eskrima sticks crackling with stored charge. The first 3 went down. Before they registered, he was serious. Combat became rhythm. Block, strike, redirect. Keep them away from the kid. Keep the civilians behind him clear. Don't think about the math. Just execute. He dropped 2 more. Deflected fire that would have hit a storefront. Somewhere behind him, people were screaming. Standard response. He tuned it out and focused on the pattern. These soldiers fought like they'd been drilled. Good fundamentals. No creativity. One of them broke through his guard. Got close to the child. The kid looked at the soldier. Tilted his head like he was considering something mildly interesting. Then the soldier wasn't there anymore. Not dead. Not knocked back. Not teleported. Just gone. Erased from existence in the space between one heartbeat and the next. No light show, no sound effect. The air where he'd been standing rippled once and settled. Dick froze. So did every other combatant in the street. The child raised both hands. Two spheres of blue-white energy formed in his palms, small and perfectly contained. He looked at the remaining soldiers with the expression of someone who'd just noticed an annoying fly. 23 soldiers vanished in silence. The street went quiet except for distant sirens and the crackle of fires. Dick's tactical brain tried to process what he'd just witnessed and came up empty. His training covered meta-human threats, magical attacks, technology beyond current understanding. It didn't cover this. Whatever this was operated on rules he didn't have a framework for. The child lowered his hands. The blue spheres disappeared. He turned to Dick with a small, curious smile. "Why is it so loud here?" The voice was high-young, carrying no weight of what had just happened. Simple question, genuine confusion. Dick took a breath, forced his heart rate down through sheer discipline. Around them, Bloodhaven continued to burn. The crack in the sky still hung open. Whatever had just arrived in his city, it wasn't human, wasn't following any playbook he knew, and had just demonstrated the ability to delete people from reality with the casual effort of swatting bugs. He needed information. He needed backup. He needed about 6 things he didn't have. What he had was a kid in a war zone asking about noise. "There's a lot happening right now," Dick said, keeping his voice level. Professional. The same tone he used when talking down someone on a ledge. "It's not usually this loud." "You got a name?" The child considered the question. "Zeno." "Okay, Zeno. I'm Nightwing. We should get you somewhere safer while we figure out what's going on." Zeno looked at him. Looked at the burning buildings. Looked at the sky where the tears still pulsed with wrong light. "I don't like loud," Zeno said. Matter of fact, no threat, just a statement of preference. Dick's calm crackled. Reports of more pariah forces mobilizing, civilians still trapped in 3 sectors. The crack in the sky was expanding, every problem compounding, and now he had this. He looked at the empty spaces where 24 soldiers had been standing seconds ago. Looked at the small figure in bright pink robes who'd erased them without visible effort or apparent concern. Whatever Zeno was, whatever had just fallen into his city, Dick had a feeling loud was about to become the least of anyone's problems. The silence after erasure felt wrong. Not peaceful. Wrong in the way a held breath becomes painful after too long. Dick moved first. Instinct overrode confusion. He turned to the handful of civilians still frozen on the sidewalk and gestured sharply. "Back! 3 blocks minimum. Move now." They stumbled away, too shocked to argue. Good. He didn't have time to convince them. Around the perimeter, emergency responders were pulling back, eyes locked on the small figure standing in pink robes. Dick understood the impulse. What he'd just witnessed defied every tactical framework he'd built over 15 years of this work. But frameworks were luxuries. Right now, he had a city bleeding out and something he couldn't classify standing in the middle of it. Zeno hadn't moved since making 24 soldiers disappear. The blue-skinned figure watched the fleeing civilians with mild interest, head tilted like a bird. Observing movement it didn't quite understand. Dick approached carefully. Not the way you approached a threat. The way you approached something unpredictable. His sticks were still charged, still ready, but he kept them lowered. Non-threatening posture, open body language. "Zeno," he said, steady, controlled. "Where did you come from?" Zeno turned those oversized eyes toward him, blinked once. Fell. "From where?" "Up." Zeno pointed at the tear in the sky. The gesture was casual, almost playful, like pointing out a cloud. Dick glanced up. The rift pulsed with light that hurt to observe directly. Whatever physics governed that thing, they weren't local. He brought his focus back to Zeno. "Listen," he said. "Direct, no preamble. If you're going to do what you just did, Do it away from civilians. Stay close to me. Follow my lead. Understood? Zeno considered this with the seriousness of someone deciding what flavor to pick. They were loud and bright. Hurt my head. Not a threat, a complaint. Dick filed that away. Zeno reacted to discomfort, not malice. That was something. Maybe. I get that, Dick said. It's loud everywhere right now. Lots of noise, lots of confusion. But I'm trying to keep people safe, and that's harder when his calm cut in. Oracle's voice tight with urgency. Nightwing, we've got structural failure in Sector 7. Buildings coming down with people still inside. ETA, Dick swore internally. 2 minutes. Routing support now. He switched channels, started coordinating. Part of his mind stayed on Zeno, watching for any shift in posture or expression. Zeno was looking at the fires burning 3 blocks east. Everything here is too much, the small figure said. No anger in it, just observation. Yeah, Dick agreed. It is. That's why I need to go help those people. You should stay here. Stay away from the fighting. Can you do that? Zeno didn't answer. Just kept watching the flames with that same detached curiosity. Dick had to make a choice. Leave this unknown variable unsupervised or abandon civilians who die in the next 90 seconds. The math was brutal. It was always brutal. He ran toward Sector 7, 300 miles above Earth, in a space that bent geometry around itself. Pariah stood before a wall of screens. Each one showed a different angle of Bloodhaven, different heat signatures, different energy readings. The sensors had been tracking Justice League members for weeks, logging their positions in the pocket dimensions he'd crafted for them. Perfect worlds where they'd burn themselves out fighting shadows while he drained their power to fuel the machine. The machine that would remake everything. One screen flickered. Reset. The energy signature that had appeared 90 seconds ago didn't match any known meta-human profile. Pariah leaned closer, fingers moving across controls that warped light as they responded to his touch. The small figure on screen had just erased 24 armored soldiers. Not killed, erased. The distinction mattered. Pariah had seen gods die. He'd watched universes collapse. Death left traces, echoes, bodies. This left nothing. He rewound the footage, watched it again. The blue spheres of energy appeared in the child's hands, with no build-up, no charge time, no visible exertion. The soldiers ceased to exist in the space between frames. Clean, absolute, terrifying in its simplicity. Pariah's chest tightened. Old instinct. The same tightness he'd felt when his homeworld's portal had torn open and shown him the void beyond. When he'd realized too late that some doors shouldn't be opened. Some knowledge came with prices that compounded forever. This was a variable. Variables threatened control. Control was the only thing standing between him and another catastrophe, like the one that had taken his family, his world, his first chance at everything. He wouldn't lose again. Pariah activated a different channel. Redeploy forces to Bloodhaven Sector 5. Priority directive containment, not elimination. The target is a class unknown entity. Approach a protocol as follows: no bright weapons, no sonic output, no direct confrontation. Use dimensional anchors and null field projectors. I want it alive and intact. A pause on the other end. Hesitation. Pariah's voice dropped to something colder. The target reacts to stimuli. Light, sound, pressure. Don't trigger it. Contain it or I lose everything. The confirmation came back in clipped acknowledgments. Pariah closed the channel and returned his attention to the screens. Nightwing was running toward a collapsing building. The detective's protege. Competent, resourceful, irritating in his refusal to understand that sometimes salvation required chains, And Zeno stood alone in the street watching fires with the expression of someone observing rain. Pariah's fingers moved across the controls. He'd built this system to trap gods, to hold the League in dreams so perfect they'd never want to leave. A simple child with unknown abilities wouldn't escape what had contained beings who'd reshaped galaxies. Dick pulled the last civilian out of the rubble with 8 seconds to spare. The building came down behind him in a roar of concrete and rebar. Dust clouded the air thick enough to choke on. He got the woman to the medics, confirmed she was breathing, and immediately turned back toward where he'd left Zeno. The small figure was gone. Dick's stomach dropped. He scanned the area. Thermal signatures through the smoke showed normal civilian patterns fleeing north. No sign of anything unusual, no bright pink in the gray landscape of destruction. Then he noticed the street. A section of asphalt near where Zeno had been standing showed a perfect circular gap. Not cracked, not burned, not exploded. Just absent, as if someone had taken an eraser to reality and lifted out a clean disk of pavement. The edges were smooth, too smooth. The kind of precision that didn't happen in combat or collapse. The air around the gap felt thinner, colder, like heat had been pulled out along with the matter. Dick's tactical mind processed it fast. Zeno hadn't wandered off. Someone had taken him. Something had cut him out of the scene with the same clinical efficiency you'd use to excise a tumor. His comm crackled. "Multiple hostiles incoming from the industrial district," a voice reported. "Heavy equipment. Moving like they've got a specific target." Dick stared at the empty circle in the street. At the absence where a small figure in pink robes had been standing 90 seconds ago. They weren't coming for him. They were coming for the child. He ran faster. Zeno blinked and the world changed. One moment fire and rubble and shouting. The next, clean white walls stretching into distance, soft light from no visible source. Silence so complete it pressed against eardrums like cotton. The air tasted sterile. Perfect. Wrong. Zeno looked around. No people, no noise, no broken things leaking smoke into sky. A figure appeared 10 feet away. Tall man, pale skin, purple-white hair. Eyes that held too much weight. He wore the expression of someone who'd been awake for years. "Welcome," Pariah said. His voice carried no echo in the white space. "I know what brought you here. Chaos, disorder, the screaming of a world tearing itself apart." He gestured at the emptiness around them. "This is better. Order, calm, a place where nothing hurts, because everything is controlled." Zeno tilted his head, studied the white walls. They shimmered at the edges like heat distortion. Fake. He'd seen enough real places to recognize performance. "It's quiet here," Pariah continued. "No loud sounds, no bright weapons, no pain pressing against your thoughts. I can give you that. Permanently. All I need is your cooperation." Zeno reached out and touched one wall. It felt like touching mist, pretending to be solid. He pulled his hand back. "You could stay," Pariah said. Something desperate crept into the edges of his tone. "You could rest. I've built perfect worlds for others, gave them exactly what they needed. Heroes strong enough to reshape galaxies now sleep in dreams they'll never want to leave, because I made those dreams better than reality." Zeno looked at him, blinked slowly. "This is fake," Zeno said. Pariah's jaw tightened. "It's better than real." Real is chaos. Real is loss. Real is watching everything you love burn, because you couldn't control the variables. I learned that lesson. I won't repeat it. Zeno raised one hand. A small blue sphere formed in his palm. "Wait," Pariah started. The sphere pulsed once. A section of wall 10 feet wide simply ceased to exist. Not crumbled, not melted. Gone. Through the gap, Bloodhaven's burning skyline was visible again, complete with sirens and screaming and the particular stink of a city coming apart. Zeno smiled. Small, genuine. Better, he said. Dick hit the industrial district at full sprint. His lungs burned. Didn't matter. Oracle had tracked the energy signature to Sector 5, an area of warehouses and processing plants that should have been evacuated hours ago. Should have been. Reality had other plans. Civilians were still here. He could see them through warehouse windows. Workers who'd refused to leave equipment, families who'd taken shelter in the wrong building, homeless population that had nowhere else to go. Exactly the kind of mess Pariah loved to exploit. Dick's comm crackled. Incoming. Heavy transport. North entrance. He changed direction, using a fire escape to gain elevation. From the roof, he watched 3 armored vehicles roll into the sector. No lights, no sirens. Silent approach. Professional. They weren't here to fight. They were here to box something in. The vehicles stopped in a triangle formation around a central warehouse. Doors opened. Soldiers emerged carrying equipment. Dick didn't recognize devices that hummed at frequencies just below hearing projectors that bent light around themselves. They moved with the precision of people following a specific playbook. One soldier activated a handheld display. Dick caught the glow from 60 feet away. On screen, thermal signatures of civilians huddled in basements. And one cold spot, a void in the heat map shaped exactly like a small child. Dick dropped from the roof and hit the soldier from behind. The man went down hard. Dick grabbed the device, crushed it under his boot, and kept moving. 2 more soldiers turned toward the sound. He met them with his Screma sticks already charged. The fight was quick, efficient. He wasn't trying to win, just disrupt, buy time, keep them off balance long enough to get people clear. All units, a voice crackled over their comms. Target has breached containment. Repeat, breach confirmed. Adjust to plan Delta. Dick swore internally. He vaulted over a cargo container and ran toward the warehouse where the thermal void had registered. Behind him, the soldiers were regrouping, calling for backup, shifting from containment to something that sounded more aggressive. He kicked open the warehouse door. Inside, the air felt thin, pressurized wrong, like standing at altitude. Zeno stood in the center of the floor, surrounded by the fractured remains of what looked like translucent barriers. They hung in the air like broken glass, slowly dissolving into nothing. The small figure turned toward Dick. No fear, no concern, just mild curiosity at the interruption. We need to move, Dick said. Direct, no time for negotiation. There are people here who'll die if this turns into a war zone. Can you follow me out? Zeno looked past him at the door, at the vehicles outside, at the soldiers who were forming up for another attempt. Loud again, Zeno said, not angry, disappointed. I know, Dick said. But if you stay here, it gets worse. They'll keep coming, more of them. Heavier weapons, brighter lights, everything you don't like. Zeno considered this. Outside, engines revved. Someone was giving orders in clipped military cadence. Dick recognized the pattern encirclement suppression field's coordinated assault. Standard playbook for containing unknown metahumans. Standard playbook that was about to get a lot of people erased from existence. Listen to me, Dick said. Kept his voice level despite the adrenaline spike. I can get you somewhere quieter. But you have to trust me for the next 5 minutes. Can you do that? Zeno looked at him. Really looked. Those oversized eyes held something Dick couldn't quite read. Not wisdom, not innocence either. Something in between that didn't translate to human expression. Then the north wall exploded inward, not from impact, from absence. A perfect rectangular section simply vanished as soldiers tried to breach through it. They stumbled into empty space where wall had been weapons raised, confusion replacing tactical precision. Zeno had turned toward the noise, raised one hand. The blue sphere was already forming. Wait, Dick said. Not a command, a request. Let me handle this. Please. Zeno paused. The sphere remained hovering in his palm like a captive star. Dick moved between Zeno and the soldiers, raised his hands. Stand down. You're endangering civilians. Pull back now or the situation deteriorates fast. The lead soldier's helmet turned towards someone off comms. Listening to orders, Dick couldn't hear, making calculations about acceptable losses and mission parameters. Then the soldier raised his weapon. Dick saw the decision in the body language half a second before the trigger pull. He dove left, already reaching for smoke pellets, already mapping exit routes and civilian positions, and the 17 ways this could go catastrophically wrong. The weapon fired. Not bullets. A pulse of something that distorted air and bent light around its trajectory. Aimed not at Dick, but past him. At Zeno. The pulse hit empty space. Zeno had moved faster than Dick had seen him move before and was standing 5 feet to the side, watching the energy dissipate against the far wall. The small figure looked at his hand. At the blue sphere. At the soldiers who were already charging their next shot. Too loud, Zeno said. The erasure was instant. Surgical. 15 soldiers vanished along with the section of floor they'd been standing on. The vehicles outside lost their front axles in perfect geometric cuts. Metal groaned as tons of armor settled onto stumps. Silence crashed back into the warehouse. Dick straightened slowly, checked his immediate surroundings. No civilians in the blast radius. No one caught in the erasure. Pure luck. Or maybe Zeno had aimed. Hard to tell. Zeno lowered his hand, looked at Dick with that same curious expression. Quieter now, the small figure said. 300 miles up, Pariah watched the feeds and felt something cold settle into his chest. Not fear. He'd burned through fear decades ago. This was recognition. The particular clarity that came from watching a strategy fail in real time and understanding exactly why. You couldn't tempt someone who didn't want anything. Couldn't contain someone who could erase containment. Couldn't threaten someone who processed reality through the lens of comfort and discomfort, rather than survival and strategy. The child wasn't a soldier, wasn't a hero, wasn't even a villain in any meaningful sense. It was a delete button in pink robes, and it had just demonstrated it would press itself whenever the environment became irritating enough. Pariah's fingers moved across controls. Different approach. If he couldn't control the child, he'd control the battlefield. Make the entire city uncomfortable. Make everywhere loud and bright and chaotic, except the spaces he designated as safe. Drive the target toward containment through environmental pressure rather than force. He had the great darkness for exactly this kind of application. The energy he'd been feeding it, the power he'd been siphoning from the League's dreams, all of it could be redirected. Weaponized, turned into a pressure system that would make staying outside his designated zones intolerable. The child would choose quiet, and Pariah would make sure quiet only existed where he wanted it. He activated the feeds to the dimensional prisons. The League members were still lost in their perfect worlds, burning energy like stars as they fought shadows that felt real enough to matter. He could pull harder. Take more. Accelerate the timeline. Increase extraction rate by 40%, he said into the comm. Prepare to deploy environmental suppression across Bloodhaven. Full saturation. I want every light source dimmed, every sound amplified, every nerve ending singing by the time we're done. The confirmation came back. Pariah watched Zeno on the screen. Watched Nightwing trying to navigate a situation that had no good answers. Control wasn't about overwhelming force. It was about making every alternative worse than compliance. He'd learned that lesson in ashes and screaming. Time to teach it to a child who thought discomfort was the worst thing reality could offer. The reports came in like hammer blows. Sector 7, structural collapse. 12 confirmed casualties, 43 unaccounted for. Sector 5 mass evacuation stalled because people refused to move toward exits near the thing in pink. Medical stations overwhelmed. Communication grid fragmenting. 3 fire companies pinned down by debris they couldn't clear without heavy equipment that couldn't reach them through streets choked with abandoned vehicles. Dick stood in what used to be a community center, now converted to a crisis command post. Maps covered one wall. Radio chatter filled the air with overlapping voices requesting support that didn't exist. Around him, exhausted responders waited for orders. He gave them. Road evacuation through the waterfront. Skip the main roads, they're death traps. Use the service tunnels under the industrial district. Get medical to set up secondary triage at the docks. If you can't carry someone, mark their location and move on. We'll come back. The responders scattered to execute. Dick turned to the map and started calculating which sectors could be written off, which ones still had a chance, where to concentrate resources that would do the most good for the most people. The math was brutal. It was always brutal. You're doing this wrong. Dick's hand froze halfway to marking another evacuation route. He turned. Alan Scott stood in the doorway. The older man looked like he'd walked through fire to get here, probably had. His green energy flickered around him like a tired flame, but his eyes were sharp, assessing. The kind of look that came from someone who'd seen cities burn before and knew the difference between managing disaster and preventing it. We need every route mapped, Dick said, defensive. He heard it in his own voice and hated it. If I can funnel people through, you're managing symptoms, Alan said. Walked into the room like he owned it. Treating this like a natural disaster when it's a coordinated attack. Pariah isn't trying to destroy the city. He's trying to trap something, and you're still thinking like someone cleaning up after an earthquake. Dick wanted to argue. Wanted to point out that people were dying right now, and abstract strategy didn't stop bleeding. But Alan's expression stopped him. Not judgment. Recognition. They don't need a symbol in the sky, Alan said. Quieter now. They need someone on the ground who won't break. Someone who will make the call when the options are all bad. He gestured at the responders coordinating in the next room. Look at them. They're waiting for you to tell them what's worth fighting for. I'm trying to save as many as... Stop acting like you're filling in, Alan cut him off. You're leading. Bruce isn't coming. Clark isn't coming. Diana isn't coming. This is yours. Own it. The words hit harder than any punch Dick had taken in the last 72 hours. Because they were true. He'd been operating like someone keeping the seat warm until the real heroes showed up. Making tactical decisions instead of strategic ones. Reacting instead of directing. Alan stepped closer. What's the actual problem here? Dick took a breath. Forced himself to think past the immediate crisis. Pariah wants the child. Zeno. He's using the city as leverage. Every civilian still here is a potential hostage or casualty Pariah can manipulate. And I can't protect Zeno from Pariah, while also protecting Bloodhaven from Zeno. So pick one. Dick stared at him. That's not... You can't save everyone, Alan said. Not cruel, factual. You never could. But you can decide what you're willing to lose and what you'll die defending. That's what leadership is. Making the choice no one else wants to make and living with it afterward. Dick looked at the map, at the red zones and yellow zones and the increasingly small pockets of green. At the city he'd chosen. The people who'd stayed because they believed someone would stand between them and the chaos. He made the choice. New priority, he said. Voice steady, clear. The voice of someone who'd stopped asking permission. We don't engage Zeno. We don't try to contain him. We keep civilians away from wherever he is, and we make sure Pariah's forces can't use crowd density against us. He turned to face Alan. We give Zeno space and hope he gets bored before Pariah figures out how to weaponize him. Alan nodded. Better. Dick moved to the comm station. started issuing new orders, redrawing evacuation routes to create a buffer zone around Sector 5, pulling responders back from areas where they'd be caught between Pariah's soldiers and an entity that could erase them from existence without effort or malice. It felt like retreat, like abandoning people. It felt like the only choice that didn't guarantee more deaths. "One more thing," Dick said into the comms. Addressed everyone who could hear him. "New engagement rules: no flashbangs, no flares, no sonic weapons. Nothing bright, nothing loud. The target reacts to sensory input. Don't give him a reason to notice you." Confirmations came back. Dick switched channels, started coordinating with what remained of city infrastructure. Behind him, Alan Scott's energy flared briefly, a signal to someone Dick couldn't see. Then, the older man nodded once and walked back toward the door. "Where are you going?" Dick asked. "You don't need a babysitter," Alan said. "You need someone clearing the path. I'll handle the big obstacles. You handle everything else." He left before Dick could respond. Dick turned back to the map, to the impossible task of protecting a city from forces he couldn't fight directly. But this time, he wasn't trying to do it alone. Wasn't trying to be Batman or Superman or anyone except the person this situation actually needed. Just a man on the ground who wouldn't break. Pariah watched the shift happen in real time. The evacuation patterns changed, became more organized, more strategic. Someone down there had stopped treating this like disaster management and started treating it like warfare. Good. That made things simpler. He activated the next phase. Dimensional anchors deployed across 3 sectors, creating zones where space bent wrong. Not enough to trap, just enough to make movement feel like pushing through water. Make every step require thought. Make comfort impossible. Null field projectors came online next. They didn't block sound or light. They warped it, made voices echo strangely, made shadows twist at wrong angles, made everything feel slightly off in ways that pressed against consciousness like a dull headache. The child would notice, the child would react, and when it did, Pariah would be watching, recording, learning the exact threshold between discomfort and erasure. Building a profile, finding the pattern. On his screens, he watched Nightwing reorganize the defense. Competent, resourceful, completely irrelevant to the actual equation. This wasn't about heroes and villains. It was about control and chaos. About making sure the variables stayed inside parameters he could manipulate. Pariah increased the null field intensity by 15%. Watch the distortion spread across Sector 5 like oil across water. Somewhere in that sector, a small figure in pink robes would start to feel uncomfortable. And discomfort Pariah had learned was the only language the child understood. Dick was coordinating the waterfront evacuation when the air went wrong. Not loud, not bright, just wrong. Like someone had adjusted the frequency of reality by half a step. Voices sounded hollow. Shadows fell in directions that didn't match light sources. The pressure in his inner ears shifted for no reason. He pressed his comm. Anyone else feeling that? Responses came back confused, disoriented. People reporting nausea, dizziness, the feeling of standing too close to high-voltage lines. Dick's tactical mind parsed it fast. Environmental manipulation. Pariah wasn't trying to trap Zeno. He was trying to irritate him. Create conditions uncomfortable enough to provoke a reaction. And if Zeno reacted the way he'd reacted before, people in the affected zone would vanish. Accelerate evacuation in sectors 4, 5, and 6, Dick ordered. I don't care if you have to drag people. Get them out. Now. He started running towards Sector 5. His own discomfort ramped up with every block. The wrongness pressed against his thoughts like static. Made it hard to think, hard to focus. If he felt it this strongly, what was it doing to Zeno? He rounded a corner and nearly collided with a Pariah strike team. 6 soldiers in black armor moving through the distortion like they'd been trained for it. They carried the same equipment from the warehouse: attempt projectors, field generators, devices designed to box in metahumans. They saw him, raised weapons. Dick didn't hesitate. Eskrima, sticks out already moving. The fight was fast and vicious. They were good, trained. But they were operating in an environment that made coordination difficult, and Dick had spent 15 years learning to fight in chaos. He dropped 3 before they adjusted. The others fell back, trying to create distance. One activated a field generator. The generator exploded, not from impact, from absence. A perfect sphere of metal and circuitry simply ceased to exist, leaving the soldier holding empty air where technology had been. 50 feet away, Zeno stood in the middle of the street. The distortion around him seemed worse, thicker. The small figure looked annoyed, in the way a child looked annoyed at a fly that wouldn't stop buzzing. "Stop," Zeno said. "Not to Dick, not to the soldiers, to everything." 2 more generators vanished. The remaining soldiers scattered, breaking formation, abandoning equipment. Smart move. Survival instinct overriding orders. Dick approached slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. "I know it's uncomfortable," he said, "but I need you to hold on a little longer, just until I get the last civilians clear. Can you do that?" Zeno looked at him, blinked those oversized eyes. "Everywhere hurts," Zeno said. "I know. I feel it too. But if you fix it the way you've been fixing things, people die. People who didn't choose this, who are just trying to get somewhere safe." Zeno tilted his head, considering. Dick's comm crackled. "Last transport clear of Sector 5. Repeat, sector is clear." He looked at Zeno, at the small figure standing in distortion that would probably get worse before it got better. At the entity that could solve this problem in seconds, but didn't understand why seconds mattered. "Now it's just us," Dick said. "And them." He gestured at the retreating soldiers. "You do what you need to do. I'll make sure no one else gets caught in it." Zeno raised one hand. Blue energy formed. Dick turned and ran. Not away, toward the last evacuation route, making sure it stayed clear. Behind him, the distortion vanished in a wave of erasure that swept across 3 blocks. Took the null fields. Took the anchors. Took a cargo truck and half a loading dock and a section of street that would need explaining later. Silence rushed back, clean, undistorted, normal. Dick slowed, turned. Zeno stood in the center of a perfectly circular gap in the wrongness. The small figure looked satisfied. "Better," Zeno said. "Asa Saman needs." 300 miles up, Pariah smiled. "Perfect." The child had just demonstrated exactly what he needed to know: threshold reaction time and area of effect. The data was already being processed, analyzed, turned into predictive models that would tell him exactly how much pressure to apply, how much discomfort to generate, how to make the child erase precisely what Pariah wanted erased. He activated the next set of anchors. This time deeper. This time synchronized with the great darkness he'd been feeding for weeks. This time he'd make everywhere hurt, and when the child tried to fix it, Pariah would already be 3 moves ahead. The sky didn't darken, it closed. One moment Bloodhaven had twilight. The next, something heavier than night pressed down like a lid slamming shut. Streetlights dimmed to ember glow. Car headlights flickered and died. Even the fires burning in collapsed buildings seemed to pull inward flames, shrinking as if starved of oxygen they should have had. Dick felt it in his chest first. Pressure, weight, the sensation of standing under water without the wetness. Around him, people stumbled, gasped, reached for walls and railings as equilibrium failed. "Stay together," he said into the comm, had to focus to make his voice work right. "Link arms, don't run, you can't see where you're going." Panic moved through the evacuation lines like current. People pushed, shoved. Someone screamed about being trapped. Someone else swore they couldn't breathe, even though air still moved in and out of lungs. Dick switched channels. I need light sources at every checkpoint. Flares, glow sticks, anything that holds steady. But keep them low, ground level only, no overhead bursts. The response came back uncertain, questioning why. Just do it, Dick said. Didn't have time to explain the equation need light to guide civilians, versus light might trigger the entity that could erase them all. And tell me the second anything feels different. He moved through the murk toward the nearest evacuation point. His night vision was good trained, honed over years of working Gotham's rooftops. But this wasn't normal darkness. This absorbed vision made depth perception a guess, made every shadow potentially solid or empty. A hand grabbed his arm. He spun, sticks half raised before recognition kicked in. Swamp Thing stood there, or something wearing the shape. The plant elemental looked wrong in this light. Diminished. Like the darkness was leaching color, even from something that shouldn't have color to lose. This is not natural night. Swamp Thing's voice came slow, deliberate. Each word chosen with the weight of something that spoke for forests. The great darkness falls, but it falls wrong, corrupted at the source. I don't have time for cosmic commentary, Dick said. People are dying down here. You misunderstand. Swamp Thing gestured at the oppressive murk. The darkness itself is not evil. It is balance, rest, the space between breaths where life renews. The elemental's eyes, if they were eyes focused on something Dick couldn't see. But someone bends it, twists it, makes it serve control instead of cycle. Dick processed that in 2 seconds. Pariah. Yes, he feeds it his fear, his need to prevent loss by preventing change. The darkness reflects what it is given. Swamp Thing began to fade back into shadow. It will worsen. He will not stop. Not until everything is still and silent and safe under his design. Then the elemental was gone, leaving Dick alone with information that changed nothing about the immediate problem, but explained why the air felt like drowning. 300 miles up, Pariah stood before screens showing Bloodhaven, consumed by shadow he'd redirected from the boundaries of reality itself. Perfect. He could see through the darkness. His systems cut through it like scalpels through fog. Every heat signature visible, every movement tracked. The child was a bright spot in the murk, small standing near the industrial sector unmoving. Increase saturation, Pariah said. Make it dense, make it press. The darkness responded, thickened. What had been oppressive became suffocating. On the screens, people collapsed, clutched at throats even though they could still breathe. The psychological weight of absolute dark triggered primal panic that no amount of oxygen could calm. Pariah watched, recorded, adjusted variables. He'd lost his world to chaos. To variables he couldn't predict or control. To doors opened without understanding what waited on the other side. His family had screamed as reality came apart, and he'd been powerless. Completely, utterly powerless because he'd believed in discovery over discipline, in exploration over containment. Never again. The League slept in his perfect prisons, dreamed battles they'd never win while he drained their power to fuel this moment. To create a world where every variable stayed inside parameters he defined, where nothing unexpected could ever happen again. The child was the last variable, the final piece that refused his framework. But even that would bend. Everything bent if you applied enough pressure to the right places. He adjusted the darkness density by another 15%. Watched the child on screen, waiting for the reaction. Dick heard the screaming before he saw the cause. He ran toward it through murk so thick it felt like pushing through curtains. His lungs worked fine, but his brain kept insisting they didn't. Kept triggering the panic response that came from being buried or drowned. He forced it down, focused on the screaming. Found a family huddled against a storefront. Mother, father, 2 kids. The mother was hyperventilating. The father had his arms around both children, but his eyes showed white all around the edges. Prey animal eyes. "Look at me," Dick said, crouched in front of them, made his voice the only solid thing in the chaos. "You can breathe. The air is still there. Your brain is lying to you about being trapped." Can't see," the mother gasped. "I know, but I can." Dick pulled a chem light from his belt, snapped it. Weak green glow pushed back maybe 3 feet of shadow. "Follow this. Stay behind me. I'll get you to the checkpoint." He led them through streets that felt narrower than they were, past buildings that loomed wrong in the pressing dark. Twice he heard other groups stumbling blind and had to redirect them with voice alone. Got the family to the checkpoint. Handed them off to responders who were barely holding together themselves. His comm crackled. "Nightwing, we've got a situation at the harbor. Pariah forces moving in formation. Looks like they're herding people toward..." Static cut the rest. Dick swore, started running. The harbor approach was chaos. He could hear it before he saw anything. Shouts, crashes, the particular sounds of panic compressed into tight spaces. Then shapes emerged from the murk. Soldiers in black armor moving with purpose. Civilians scrambling away from them. Away from light sources the soldiers carried. Driving them like cattle toward the industrial sector, toward where Zeno was. Dick didn't think. Just moved. Hit the nearest soldier from behind with both sticks charged. The man went down. Dick kept moving, disrupting formation, creating gaps in the corral they were building. "Break contact," he said into the comm. "All units pull back from..." Something struck him across the shoulders. Not a weapon. Pressure. Like invisible hands shoving down. He stumbled, caught himself on a shipping container. The darkness had weight now. Actual physical mass pressing from above. Around him, people dropped. Soldiers and civilians both. Crushed to knees by atmospheric pressure that shouldn't exist. Dick forced himself upright through pure stubbornness and 15 years of conditioning that said you didn't quit when your body wanted to. "Get up!" he shouted at the civilians nearest him. "Get up and move. Don't let it pin you." Some did. Some couldn't. He grabbed the ones who couldn't and pulled them toward the checkpoint, dragging dead weight through shadow that fought him like mud. 50 yards away, Zeno stood watching. The small figure looked wrong. Off balance, like someone trying to stand in high wind. The oversized eyes blinked rapidly. Rapidly. Uncomfortable, confused, annoyed in the way that preceded tantrums. "Zeno," Dick called, had to shout to be heard over the pressure. "I need you to hold on. Just a little longer. Don't." The darkness surged. Became a wall. Became a ceiling. Became a box contracting from all sides at once. Zeno raised both hands. Blue energy formed. Not spheres this time. Light. Pure and absolute and clean. It cut through the darkness like a blade through cloth, and then erased it. A wave of nothing swept outward from Zeno's position. Where it passed, the darkness vanished. Not pushed back. Deleted. Removed from existence the same way soldiers and equipment and inconvenient matter had been removed before. The wave expanded 3 blocks. Took the pressure. Took the weight. Took the crushing suffocation and left normal night air in its place. People gasped, sobbed, collapsed in relief. Dick straightened slowly. Looked at Zeno. The small figure lowered his hands. Looked up at the sky where the darkness still pressed beyond the cleared zone. Where it was already beginning to seep back in at the edges. "I want the lights back," Zeno said. Simple statement. Child's complaint. Backed by the power to enforce it absolutely. Dick's tactical mind ran the numbers and came up cold. If Zeno decided the darkness was too annoying to tolerate, if the small figure in pink robes decided to fix the problem the way he'd fixed every other problem so far, he'd erase it, all of it, Everything Pariah was pulling from the boundaries of reality. Everything touching Bloodhaven, maybe everything touching Earth. And there wouldn't be negotiation. Wouldn't be warning. Just a decision made by something that processed existence through the lens of comfort and irritation, rather than consequence and survival. Dick opened his mouth to say something. Anything. To try buying more time with words that probably wouldn't matter. The darkness crashed back in like a hammer, heavier than before, denser. Pariah had felt the erasure and responded by doubling down, making the environment intolerable, forcing the reaction he wanted. Dick's knees buckled under the renewed pressure. Around him, people who just started breathing normally collapsed again. Civilian and soldier alike crushed by weight that had no business existing in atmosphere. And Zeno stood in the center of it all, small hands beginning to glow again. This time, Dick suspected the child wasn't going to stop at 3 blocks. The weight crushed down harder. Dick felt his spine compress. Vertebrae grinding, shoulders forcing toward knees. Around him, people weren't screaming anymore. No air left for it. Just gasping, choking on atmosphere that had turned solid. His fingers clawed at pavement. Found purchase. He pulled himself forward 1 inch, then another, moving toward the evacuation route through sheer refusal to quit. Behind him, someone's breathing stopped, then another. The sound of bodies shutting down echoed wrong in the oppressive murk. Pariah's soldiers advanced through the killing zone. They had equipment, respirators, exoskeletons compensating for the atmospheric load, moving like divers through deep water while everyone else drowned on dry land. Dick's vision tunneled, gray at the edges. He forced it back, forced one hand forward, then the other, dragging himself toward civilians who couldn't move at all. Then silence fell like a guillotine. Not absence of sound, presence of something that made sound irrelevant. The air stopped pressing, started vibrating, every molecule humming at a frequency that bypassed ears and resonated directly in bone. Dick looked up. The specter stood 30 feet above street level. No dramatic entrance, no light show. The entity simply existed where it hadn't existed before, and reality adjusted around the fact. Green cloak billowing in wind that came from nowhere. Cowl shadowing a face that held too much judgment to register as human. The soldiers froze. Weapons lowered. Survival instinct overriding training. This wasn't something you pointed guns at. This was something you prayed wouldn't notice you. Enough, the specter said. The word carried weight. Authority that didn't ask or suggest. Simply stated law and expected compliance. One soldier broke and ran. Made it 5 steps before the specter's attention turned toward him. The man stopped. Not because he wanted to. Because motion became impossible when judgment focused on you that completely. You bring weapons to innocence, the specter said. Each word deliberate, measured. You follow orders that compound suffering. You choose power over mercy. The soldier tried to speak. Couldn't. The specter's hand moved gestures so small, it barely qualified as motion, and the man's armor began to tighten. Not crushing, constricting, metal bending inward, millimeter by millimeter. The kind of pressure that would take hours. The kind that gave time to think about choices. The other soldiers scattered, ran in directions away from the entity whose presence made the air taste like iron and ozone. The specter let them go, turned attention toward the source of the oppressive weight. Toward the satellite systems, 300 miles up that bent reality to Pariah's design. Show yourself, the specter commanded. For 3 seconds, nothing. Then screens manifested in the air, holographic. Pariah's face rendered in light that fought the surrounding murk. The expression showed strain, defiance, fear wrapped in the conviction of someone who believed their terror justified any action. You don't understand what I'm preventing, Pariah said. voice tight. I've seen worlds burn, seen chaos consume everything because no one had the will to impose order. I won't let that happen again. Your fear does not grant you authority, the specter replied. No inflection, statement of fact. Your pain does not excuse your actions. You cage heroes, weaponize darkness, crush the innocent to control a variable. The variable threatens everything, Pariah shot back. That child could erase. Kutumaika the specter interrupted. You act on possibility, on assumption. You punish before crime. That is not justice. That is tyranny. The screens flickered. Pariah's face shifted, calculation replacing emotion. You can judge me, execute your sentence, but you can't stop what I've already set in motion. The machine runs. The darkness spreads. And when you're done with me, someone else will have to clean up the chaos you preserve. Dick used the brief reprieve to move. Got to his feet. Started pulling civilians up, getting them mobile, away from the confrontation that could go catastrophic at any second. His comm crackled with confused reports. Other sectors wondering what had changed. Why the weight had lifted. Pull everyone back, Dick ordered. Quiet, urgent. Clear the area, now, because he could see it in Pariah's expression. The man wasn't backing down, wasn't surrendering. Was doing what cornered animals did when predators appeared. Escalating, the specter's attention shifted. Not toward Pariah, toward something small and pink, standing in the shadow of a collapsed storefront. Zeno watched the exchange with the expression of someone observing an argument in a language they didn't speak. Mild interest, no concern. The small figure's hands hung loose at sides. No blue glow yet. Just observation. The specter descended. Moved through space like falling upward, stopped 10 feet from Zeno. For 5 seconds neither spoke. Dick's tactical brain screamed warnings. Two entities operating on rules he didn't understand, standing close enough that if either decided the other was a problem, the resulting collision would erase city blocks. You don't belong to my jurisdiction, the specter said finally. Not to Zeno. To the air. To cosmic law. No sin marks you. No crime weighs against your name. You act without malice or greed or wrath. Zeno tilted his head, blinked. But power without judgment courts disaster, the specter continued. Others will die if you act on comfort rather than consequence. They're loud, Zeno said. Simple, factual. Yes, the specter acknowledged. And you possess the means to silence them. But silence is not always justice. Sometimes noise is the sound of life struggling to continue. Zeno considered this with the seriousness of someone deciding whether clouds looked interesting, then said, I don't like it here. The specter remained motionless, evaluating. Whatever calculation ran behind that cowled face, it produced no immediate verdict. Just cold assessment of a problem that didn't fit established categories. Dick moved between them. Slowly, hands visible. We're working on getting him somewhere quieter, Dick said. Addressed the specter, but kept Zeno in peripheral vision. Once civilians are clear, once Pariah's forces pull back, it gets less chaotic. Pariah will not pull back, the specter said. He cannot. His fear drives him past reason, past self-preservation. He would rather burn everything than risk another loss. Then we contain him first, Dick said. Before. The holographic screens exploded into static, light, something that hurt to look at directly. When it cleared, Pariah's face filled them wall-sized. No pretense of calm. Raw obsession burned in those eyes. You want to judge me, fine. But I'm not waiting for the sentence. His hands moved across controls Dick couldn't see. I've fed the darkness everything the League had. Drained them dry to fuel this moment. You think you can stop it? You think your vengeance matters against what I've built? The sky tore open. not like the crack Zeno had fallen through. This was surgical, precise. Pariah had been studying the child's reactions, learning thresholds. And now he pulled the great darkness through a dimensional anchor, placed exactly where it would cause maximum irritation to someone with Zeno's sensitivities. Light warped, sound bent. The air itself seemed to scream at frequencies just below hearing. Everything bright and loud and wrong all at once. Dick's hands went to his ears. Didn't help. The noise bypassed physical channels, resonated in teeth and sinuses in the base of his skull. Around him, people dropped. Soldiers and civilians both. Even the specter's form rippled. Distorted under the assault of corrupted cosmic energy focused through technology that shouldn't exist. And Zeno looked up at the tearing sky with an expression that had progressed past annoyed, past uncomfortable, into something simpler and more absolute. The small figure raised both hands. Blue light formed. Not spheres this time. Not controlled manifestation. Raw power. Unfiltered. The kind that came before someone decided to be careful about collateral damage. "Make it quiet," Zeno said. Dick's last thought before the erasure wave hit was that Pariah had finally pushed exactly hard enough, and now everyone was going to pay for it. The anchor manifested like a wound in reality. Not a portal, not a gateway. A hinge. The point where Pariah had been feeding corrupted cosmic energy into local space, bending the great darkness through dimensional mechanics that shouldn't work but did, because he'd burned everything to make them function. It hung above the industrial district like a scar, pulsing, radiating wrongness that made eyes water and teeth ache. The kind of structure that announced its presence by making existence uncomfortable in a 3-block radius. And it was loud, not sound. Sensation. Frequencies that bypassed ears and resonated in marrow. Made thoughts hard to hold. Made coordination difficult. Made every nerve ending sing at pitches designed to exhaust and overwhelm. Dick saw it appear and immediately understood what Pariah had done. This wasn't another containment attempt. This was scorched earth. The man had given up on capturing Zeno and switched to forcing a reaction, creating conditions so intolerable that the child would lash out. And when that happened, Pariah would already be positioned to exploit whatever erasure followed. Except Pariah had made one miscalculation. He'd assumed he could predict which direction Zeno would strike. "All units pull back from Sector 4, Dick said into his comm. Had to concentrate to form words through the resonance. "Establish safe zones at minimum half-mile radius. This is going to get worse before it gets better." Responses came back shaky, questioning. He didn't have time to explain. "Do it now. That's an order." He ran toward the nearest evacuation checkpoint. The streets were chaos. People stumbling, holding heads. Some bleeding from noses and ears. Psychosomatic response to pressure that existed but couldn't be measured in atmospheres. Pariah's forces moved through the disturbance zone like they'd been inoculated. Armor insulated them. Tech compensated. They advanced in formation toward something Dick couldn't see but could guess. Toward Zeno. He intercepted the first squad at the intersection of dock and industrial access. 6 soldiers moving tactical. Weapons lowered but ready. Not firing, just hurting. Pushing people toward confined spaces where panic would compound. Dick didn't announce himself. Just hit them fast and hard. Eskrima sticks already charged. The lead soldier went down before his HUD could tag the threat. The next 2 turned, but Dick was already inside their guard. The fight was brutal, efficient. They were good, but he'd been doing this since he was 8 and had learned from the best teacher fear could create. He dropped 4 in under 20 seconds. The remaining 2 backed off, raised weapons, then stopped. Froze mid-motion like someone had cut their strings. The specter stood behind them. Hadn't walked, hadn't flown, simply occupied space between one moment and the next. "You make war on the helpless," the specter said. Judgment. The soldier's armor began to constrict, slowly, giving them time to feel each increment of pressure, to understand what they'd chosen. Dick didn't wait to watch. Grabbed civilians who'd been pinned by the squad and started moving them towards safety. Behind him, the specter remained motionless. A boundary. The kind that didn't need explanation. Nightwing. Oracle's voice cut through static. I'm reading massive energy buildup at the anchor point. Whatever Pariah's doing, he's committing everything. Dick looked up. The anchor pulsed brighter. The resonance increased. People dropped to their knees, started screaming, or went silent, fight-or-flight response breaking down under sustained assault on every sense simultaneously. And 50 yards away, visible through the distortion, Zeno stood watching the anchor with an expression that had progressed past irritation into something colder. The small figure's hands weren't glowing yet, but the posture had changed. Weight shifted forward. Head tilted at an angle that suggested active consideration rather than passive observation. Dick's tactical mind ran the math. If Zeno erased the anchor and everything connected to it, if the child decided to solve the problem the way he'd solved every other problem, the blast radius wouldn't be measured in blocks. It would be measured in what fragments of city remained afterward. He pressed his comm. Everyone out. Final evacuation order. If you can move, move. If you can't, find cover and pray. Then he ran towards Zeno. Not to stop him, to at least try being present when the decision got made. 300 miles up, Pariah watched his screens and felt the first real spike of fear in decades. The child was looking at the anchor. Really looking. The way someone looked at a problem they decided to solve. He increased the output, pushed the resonance higher, made the environment intolerable because intolerable meant predictable. Meant the child would erase the anchor, and in that moment of erasure, Pariah would capture the energy signature, learn the frequency, build countermeasures that the anchor vanished. One instant it existed. The next it didn't. No explosion, no collapse. Just absence where massive dimensional engineering had been sustaining itself through power siphoned from imprisoned gods. The great darkness recoiled. Pariah had been pulling it through the anchor like water through a pipe, and now the pipe was gone, and the water had nowhere to go except back to source. It withdrew in a rush that left the sky above Bloodhaven suddenly shockingly clear. Stars visible, moon bright, normal night air replacing the suffocating weight. On his screens, people gasped, sobbed, collapsed in relief, and Pariah's system screamed alerts. Power flow interrupted. Dimensional matrix destabilized. The pocket prisons holding the Justice League showed fluctuations. Stress fractures in the perfect dreams he'd crafted. Everything he'd built. Everything he'd sacrificed. 30 years of preparation and guilt and absolute certainty that he could prevent another catastrophe if he just controlled enough variables. Collapsing because a child didn't like being uncomfortable. Pariah slammed controls, activated backup anchors, smaller, weaker, but enough to re-establish connection, enough to pull the darkness back and reimpose order before chaos reasserted and the League broke free and everything spiraled into the exact disaster he'd spent his life trying to prevent. The screen showed the child, still standing in the industrial district, still looking up at where the anchor had been. Pariah activated every remaining system, threw everything at maintaining what he'd already lost. "You don't understand," he said. Knew the child couldn't hear him, said it anyway because the words had been building for 3 decades. I watched my world burn, watched my family scream, because I opened a door I couldn't close, because I believed discovery mattered more than control. He pulled harder on the darkness, forced it back through connections too small to sustain the flow, burned through reserves built over years in seconds. I won't make that mistake again. I won't let variables exist outside my design. I won't. The backup anchors vanished, all of them, simultaneously. Surgical removal of every point where he'd tried to reimpose his will on reality. Pariah stared at the screens, at the empty spaces where his life's work had been, then looked at the child, who deleted it with less effort than swatting a fly. Zeno was looking directly at the observation satellite now. Those oversized eyes locked on sensors that shouldn't be visible from ground level, but apparently were to something that processed existence differently. Pariah felt his chest tighten. Old, familiar sensation. The same tightening he'd felt when his homeworld's portal had torn open and shown him infinity. The same tightening that came right before loss. He activated manual override, dropped his satellite toward atmosphere, toward the child. If he couldn't control this variable, then he'd at least force it to acknowledge him. Force it to understand that some people fought chaos with everything they had, even when everything wasn't enough. The satellite screamed through entry burn. Pariah wrote it down. Watched Bloodhaven grow larger on screens. Watched the child continue staring up with that same mild expression. He crashed into the industrial district at terminal velocity. Ejected from the wreckage through systems designed for exactly this contingency. Landed 50 feet from Zeno in armor that barely kept him alive through impact. Stood. You destroyed everything, Pariah said. Wanted it to sound like accusation. Came out like grief. Do you even understand what you've done, the chaos you've unleashed, the variables you've freed? Zeno blinked. I built order, Pariah continued. Took a step forward. The armor groaned. Something broken in his left leg. Didn't matter. I made the world safe. Controlled the factors that lead to catastrophe. And you erased it because you were uncomfortable. Another step. That's what power without judgment creates. That's what happens when force exists without framework or restraint or understanding of consequence. Zeno tilted his head. Considered Pariah the way someone considered an insect that wouldn't stop buzzing. Stop, Zeno said. Simple word, simple request. Pariah took another step forward. Reached for controls that would activate one final fail-safe. One last attempt to impose his will on entropy. I won't stop, he said. I can't. Because if I stop, then I lose again, and I promised myself I would never. He vanished. Clean. Absolute. The same way the anchors had vanished. The same way the soldiers had vanished. Existence to non-existence without the interval between. The armor clattered to pavement. Empty. The systems inside still running for 2 seconds before they registered the absence of operator and shut down. Silence rushed into the space where Pariah had been shouting. Dick approached slowly. Looked at the empty armor. At Zeno standing calm and unbothered in the middle of devastation. Is he? Dick started. Gone. Psst, Zeno said. Not regret, not satisfaction, statement of fact. Around them, Bloodhaven continued burning. The great darkness had withdrawn, but the damage remained. Buildings collapsed. Streets torn, people injured or dead or traumatized beyond immediate recovery. The specter materialized nearby. Regarded the empty armor. The child. The man who'd tried holding the line between cosmic forces. Judgment rendered mas. Nender, the specter said. Not about Pariah, about the situation. About power meeting power, and neither side operating on rules the other could comprehend. Dick looked at Zeno. At the small figure in pink robes who'd just deleted someone from existence for the crime of being persistently annoying. Can you bring him back? Dick asked. Didn't specify who he was asking. Zeno looked at him, blinked. No, the specter answered instead. What is erased cannot be restored. That is the nature of absolute deletion. Dick nodded slowly. Turned toward the comm. Started coordinating rescue operations for a city that had just survived because its destroyer had gotten bored. Behind him, Zeno looked up at the clear sky. At stars visible again. at the absence of everything that had been pressing down. "Quiet now," the small figure said, and smiled. Smoke drifted through streets that had been war zones 20 minutes ago. No explosions, no resonance, no crushing weight. Just the aftermath. Emergency lights cutting through haze, voices calling names. The particular quiet that came after violence stopped, but before anyone processed what had happened. Dick coordinated from the community center that had become command. Maps updated with casualty reports. Red zones where buildings had collapsed. Yellow zones structurally unsound. Green zones still viable for evacuation routes. The numbers weren't final, but they were bad. Hundreds confirmed dead. Thousands injured. Entire blocks erased, not by Zeno, by conventional destruction compounded over hours of sustained chaos. "Medical needs more supplies at Dock Triage," someone reported. "And we've got looters in Sector 2. Dick rerouted units. Prioritized. Made the calls about who got help first and who had to wait. The kind of math that ground you down if you let yourself think about it too long. Outside Pariah's forces were breaking apart. No central command, no coordination. Some surrendered, some scattered. Some kept fighting because fighting was all they'd been doing. And stopping required a decision their training hadn't covered. Dick sent teams to handle it. Quick containment. No extended combat. The city couldn't afford more collateral damage. Alan Scott walked in looking like he'd aged a decade in the last hour. Green energy still flickered around him, but weak, guttering. The kind of exhaustion that came from holding impossible positions too long. "Status?" Alan asked. "Assessed." "Stable," Dick said. Didn't qualify it with barely. "Evacuation's 60% complete. We're triaging as we find people. Rescue operations will run through the night." "And the child?" Dick glanced toward the industrial district. Toward where Zeno had been standing the last time anyone checked. "Still there? Hasn't moved? Hasn't done anything." Alan nodded. Sat down like his legs had given up negotiating with gravity. "You held the line." "I held what I could," Dick corrected. "The rest held itself or didn't. That's what leadership is. Making the choice between bad options and living with it after." Alan's eyes focused on the maps, on the red zones. "You kept more people alive than anyone else could have. That counts." Dick wanted to argue. Wanted to point at the casualty numbers and ask how that counted as success. But Alan's expression said he already knew the argument and had run it himself 100 times across a lifetime of similar nights. So Dick just nodded and went back to coordinating. "Villas. The quintessence appeared without announcement. One moment the sky above Bloodhaven was empty. The next 5 figures stood in formation at an altitude where atmospheric pressure should have been lethal. Zeus, High Father, Ganthet, the wizard, Phantom Stranger. They observed. Didn't speak. Didn't intervene. Just watched the city below with the attention of beings who existed to monitor cosmic variables. The specter materialized among them. Not invited, not unwelcome. Simply present. "The variable remains," Ganthet said. Statement, not question. "Yes," the specter confirmed. "It erased a threat to dimensional stability," High Father observed. "That should be acknowledged." "It erased because it was irritated," the specter countered. "Not because it understood consequence or chose justice. The outcome was favorable. The reasoning was not." Zeus leaned forward. Lightning flickered in his eyes. "Then we contain it. Remove the variable before it decides annoyance justifies erasing something we need." "You would fail," the specter said. Flat, certain. I felt its nature. It operates outside our jurisdiction, outside our understanding of power hierarchies. You cannot judge what doesn't recognize judgment. Cannot contain what deletes containment. Phantom Stranger spoke for the first time. Voice carrying that particular resonance that came from beings who existed between definitions. The door it fell through remains open. Incomplete closure. Reality has a wound. Can you seal it? Ganthet asked. Doors don't close because you wish them to, the stranger replied. They close when the frame supports closure, or when what passed through passes back. The quintessence fell silent. Watch the small figure in pink robes standing amid rubble 50,000 feet below. Considered implications that ranged from local to universal. We observe, Saphars, Highfather said finally. We document. We prepare for variables we cannot control by strengthening what we can. Agreement rippled through the council. Not satisfaction, acceptance of limitations. They dispersed, returned to their domains, left the specter hovering alone above a city that had just learned cosmic law had exceptions. Dick found Zeno where the industrial district used to be. The small figure stood on cracked pavement, looking up at stars that had been hidden for hours. No urgency, no concern. Just quiet observation of a sky that had finally stopped being annoying. Dick approached slowly, hands visible. Non-threatening, even though threatening wouldn't have mattered. You leaving? He asked. Zeno looked at him, blinked. It's quiet now. Yeah, Dick agreed. Thanks to you, sort of. Mostly because you made the loud things stop. Zeno tilted his head. Didn't seem to register thanks as relevant. The people you helped, Dick tried. The ones who would have died if you hadn't stopped Pariah, they're grateful. Okay, Zeno said. Polite indifference, like acknowledging weather. Dick realized he was trying to apply human social frameworks to something that didn't operate on gratitude or debt or mutual understanding. Zeno had solved a problem that affected him. The fact that it helped others was coincidental. Where will you go? Dick asked instead. Zeno looked up at the tear in the sky where he'd fallen through. It still pulsed, still radiated wrong physics, still hung there like an open question. Up, Zeno said, pointed, then vanished. No build-up, no goodbye. Just presence to absence. The way someone changed channels. Dick stood alone in the rubble. Looked at the empty space where a cosmic variable had been deciding whether to erase his city. Felt the particular exhaustion that came from surviving something you'd had no control over. His comm crackled. Nightwing, we need you at the checkpoint. Coordination breaking down. He turned away from the empty space. Started walking toward people who needed him to make more impossible choices with incomplete information and no guarantee any of it would matter. Behind him, the tear in the sky pulsed one more time, then sealed. Reality stitched itself shut with the casual indifference of physics reasserting normal rules. The wound closed. The door locked. The variable removed itself from the equation. Bloodhaven was left with wreckage and casualties and the memory of something that had operated on rules nobody understood. 3 days later, Dick sat in a briefing room in what remained of City Hall. Federal agencies, state authorities, meta-human task forces, everyone who had jurisdiction or wanted it. They filled chairs and talked over each other about protocols and contingencies and the 17 ways this could have been prevented if someone had just followed procedure. We need registration, someone from Homeland Security said. Full documentation of any entity with power exceeding Class 4 metrics. Registration doesn't work when the subject can delete the registry, someone else countered. Then we need containment protocols, null zones, dimensional anchors, ways to isolate threats before they reach population centers. Dick listened, watched the conversation spiral into bureaucratic territorialism. Watched people who hadn't been there reduce complexity to checklists and oversight. Alan Scott caught his eye from across the room. Raised one eyebrow in an expression that said everything about how useful this meeting was. Dick stood. We're done here. Heads turned. Someone started to object. No, Dick said. Cut through it. You want a plan for the next crisis? Fine. Draft your protocols, build your systems. But understand this, what happened in Bloodhaven wasn't a meta-human incident. It wasn't something you can register or contain or prepare for with better procedures. He gestured at the maps behind him. At the damage assessments and casualty reports. That was cosmic. That was something falling through a crack in reality because reality has cracks. And when the next one falls through, your protocols won't matter. Your containment won't matter. The only thing that'll matter is whether someone's on the ground willing to stand between people and disaster until the disaster gets bored. Silence held for 3 seconds. Then someone cleared their throat and started talking about budget allocations, and Dick stopped listening. He walked out. Alan followed. "You handled that well," Alan said. "I told them the truth," Dick replied. "They'll ignore it and do what they were always going to do anyway." "Probably," Alan agreed. "But you still told them. That's the job, standing up when the easy answer is sitting down." They stood on the steps outside City Hall, looked at Bloodhaven spread below them. Construction crews already working. People returning to check on homes. Life reasserting itself the way it always did after crisis because stopping meant acknowledging you had no control. And most people couldn't live with that. "You think it'll come back?" Alan asked. Dick thought about oversized eyes and pink robes and the casual deletion of problems. "I don't know. But if it does, we'll deal with it, same way we dealt with this. By surviving." "By surviving," Dick confirmed. It wasn't much, but it was honest. And honesty was all he had left.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And be sure to turn on notifications so you won't miss our future videos. Thank you for watching and we will see you next time.